This is a demonstration of how to work the short row technique in the extended wave shawl. The sample in front of me, I've worked the first 8 rows of the pattern which starts this bottom triangle. I now need to work row 9, so I'm going to knit the first 2 stitches, then work a yarn over, increase, knit across to the last 2 stitches, where I will work another yarn over and then knit the last 2 stitches. And then the pattern tells you to, at this point, to stop, and you're not going to turn the knitting, you need to slide the knitting to the other end of your circular needle. So I'm going to push this to the other end of my circular needle, and I'm now not using the maroon colour, I'm going to use my second colour now. So I'm going to put that one out of the way, and I'm going to pick up my new yarn. And I'm going to start knitting across the same stitches again. But this time, as I work, so I've joined my new colour, and I'm going to knit the next stitch with both ends of the new colour, because that helps secure the new colour, and then I don't need to hold on to that end. And I'm actually going to knit the yarn over. So the instruction tells you to knit 6. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I've knitted 6 stitches. I'm now going to turn the knitting, and I'm going to make a double stitch. So to make a double stitch with the yarn at the front, I'm going to slip the stitch from the left needle to the right needle, and then pull the working yarn over the top to create a double stitch on the right needle here. And I'm now going to knit to the last 2 stitches in the row, yarn over, knit that stitch which is 2 loops because it was knitted with 2 ends, and the edge stitch. And if this edge stitch is a bit loose, you can just tug on the tail end just to tighten it up. And I'm going to turn again. So that's one ridge of the new colour. I'm now going to knit across to the double stitch. So I've got a bright pink stitch, and then I've got 2 loops connected to the bright pink but pulled over, and this is the double stitch. So I now treat this stitch as one, and I'm going to knit the double stitch and then knit 1 more stitch, turn, make a double stitch by pulling the yarn over and knit to the last 2 stitches, yarn over and knit 2, and turn again. In fact, I will bring this yarn over here for a minute. So I've now got 2 ridges in the light pink. I'm going to knit to my double stitch, So again here I've got a pink stitch, And then I've got the pink stitch, which has also got the 2 maroon loops there as well. And that's the double stitch. So make sure you go through, when you're doing this one, you make sure you treat it as 1 stitch and then 1 more stitch. Turn. And again, when you turn, you make a new double stitch, so slip the stitch to the right needle, pull the yarn over the top and knit to the last 2 stitches. Yarn over and knit 2. So I'm going to turn again. So if I'm looking at my piece of knitting now, I've worked 3 ridges or 6 rows of garter stitch on this edge, with short rows gradually getting longer. At this point I now need to move to work at the other end of the needle. So I'm going to slide the knitting to the other end of the needle, and I am also going to turn it back to the other side, so my original colour is here, and I'm going to start knitting with the original colour again. So I'm now going to start knitting on the darker side, the maroon side, and I'm going to knit first 2 stitches, and because at the end of the original base triangle we did a yarn over, so we must knit that loop as normal, and then we continue across. And if you look at the stitches, the 2 stitches just before the light pink stitches, this is actually 1 stitch. This is the double stitch from the previous row. So I need to work those 2 stitches together as 1 stitch. It's very important to be able to recognise this particular point, because this is probably the trickiest point, the start of a new section. I knit the 2 legs together and then I knit 1 more stitch. Turn the knitting, slip the stitch to the right needle and pull the yarn over the top to make a double stitch. Knit to the last 2 stitches, yarn over and knit 2. Turn. Now I prefer to use stitch markers to help me count the numbers of rows in each section. At the beginning of the pink section it was quite easy because you had a clear colour difference, but I'm now working in the same colour on this side as previously, so in order to tell that I've actually worked 2 rows or 1 ridge of garter stitch, I'm going to slip a locking stitch marker into the edge of the knitting just under those purl bumps. I'm now going to continue by knitting across to my double stitch. So again, when we're working towards the centre, it's always knit all the stitches, and this time I'm coming up to the double stitch. I've got a maroon stitch and then I've got a maroon which has also got some pink attached to it, so that's the double stitch there, and I'm going to knit 1 more row, or 1 more stitch, sorry, 1 more stitch. Turn. Make the double stitch by pulling the yarn over the right needle and knit to the last 2. So when you're knitting towards the edge, you're going to be making your yarn over eyelet 2 stitches in. The yarn over and then knit 2. So I've now got 2 ridges, 1, 2. And knit towards the double stitch again. So again, as I'm coming up to my double stitch, you can also feel that the knitting is slightly different. That's the last normal stitch, this is the double stitch, and then I'm going to knit 1 more stitch, turn, make a new double stitch and knit to the last 2 stitches, yarn over, knit 2. So the first section was 6 rows or 3 ridges, but this second section is going to be 8 rows, so I have to repeat the process once more. So knit towards the double stitch, that's the last normal stitch, and then here's the double stitch, and then I knit 1 more stitch, turn, with the yarn at the front, slip the stitch purlwise and pull the yarn over to make the double stitch, knit to the last 2 stitches, yarn over and knit 2. I should have explained earlier that I did originally have a locking stitch marker in the bottom triangle to help me recognise which was initially the right and wrong side of the shawl. Garter stitch looks the same both sides, so it's important when you start the little base triangle to know which is the right side and which is the wrong side. So if I just turn this once more, I've now got 1, 2, 3, 4 ridges above where I've placed my locking stitch marker. So that's 8 rows. A garter ridge consists of 2 rows, so that's 2, 4, 6, 8 rows. So I've now finished this little section, and I'm going to go back to knitting from the other end. So again, I need to push the knitting to the other end and also turn it so that it's got the yarn at the right end for the next section. So I'm going to start knitting, let me move my needles out of the way. I'm going to start knitting the light pink again, and it's exactly the same. Once you've moved to the opposite end, it's the same process, so it's knit to the double stitch, so the first time you're doing the new colour, you need to be aware as you're coming towards the opposite colour, the other colour, you're looking for the 2 loops over the needle before the change of colour. Those 2 loops are the double stitch. So I work those 2 together and then I knit 1 stitch, turn, make a new double stitch, and work back to the other end. Put the yarn over it. So I turn back now, and again this is where I want to place a new locking stitch marker. So I happen to have two different coloured markers, so I'm going to use orange on this side. So I'm going to place the locking stitch marker under that ridge that I've just completed. So that's my first ridge of this new section. So again, we're going to do exactly the same as we did before. I'm going to do 4 repeats of adding one more stitch, but then we're going to make a slight change after that. So I'm going to knit that, double stitch, knit 1, turn, pull the yarn over, knit back, make a yarn over at the end. So that's 2, I'll just bring out some more yarn. Knit to the double stitch, knit, yes that's it, the double stitch, knit one more stitch, turn, make a new double stitch, yarn over, knit 2. So that's 1, 2, 3 ridges. Knit the double stitch and one more stitch, so the very first section we made 3 ridges and you moved the double stitch forward by 1 stitch every ridge. The second section, which was on this side, we worked 4 ridges, and again we just moved the short rows into the opposite colour by 1 stitch each time. This section we're going to make this 5 ridges, and this is where this row is slightly different from the previous rows, because I'm going to be knitting up to the double stitch as before. There, and then I work the double stitch, but on this 5th row or ridge I'm going to knit 2 more stitches and then turn, make a double stitch and work back to the other end. when you're trying to work out how many ridges you've worked in your section, it's always much easier to count if you count while looking at the side with the edge at the point of the needle. So when I want to count these ridges, I would count them from this side, and that's 1, 2, 3, 4. I've done 5 ridges. But when I want to count these ridges, I need to turn the knitting over. So if I turn this over the other way, again I can count 1, 2, 3, 4. So I originally did 3 ridges at the bottom here, then 4, then 5. I'm now ready to move to the other end again, and I would now start working my new section in the dark colour, and this time I would be working 6 ridges in this section because it's 1 more than I worked in the previous section. I would start exactly the same by working 1 stitch extra 4 times, but in this one I would do 1 stitch extra 4 times and then 2 stitches extra twice to give me my 6 ridges in the new section. And that's the way this particular shawl builds up. So you're continually swapping sides. Every new section you're adding 1 more ridge and you're adding extra stitches going into the opposite colour according to the chart given to you in the pattern. So that's how to get started with the extended wave shawl.